I lived in Lawndale when I was born. I was born up in Inglewood, Bassinet Hospital up on Inglewood Avenue in 1941. Of course, my parents were living in Lawndale, 4538 Manhattan Beach Boulevard. My dad moved to Lawndale around 1922 or 23, and he bought 4 lots on Manhattan Beach Boulevard where Manziel is. He wasn't the first owner. He bought them from a previous owner who had built a little shack on the property. And what he did, he moved out from Missouri in 1918, moved to Redondo Beach where his aunt lived. He worked for Pacific Electric Railroad in Redondo Beach. And then he got a job working for the bank store and office fixtures in LA. And anyway, he was born in 1900, so he was around 23 years old when he bought the property in Lawndale, bought 4 lots on the south side of Manhattan Beach Boulevard, close to Manziel. The freeway came eventually, 405 freeway went right through our property in 60. Moved out of Lawndale in 1958. The state bought our property. My dad was active in the Lawndale Civic Association and from around 1941 to 44. And he was trying to do he was too old to be in the World War II, but he was trying to do his community service by serving on this Civic Association. Lawndale Civic Association was a very interesting organization. They couldn't pass any laws, they couldn't tax anybody, but they could write letters, strong letters to the supervisors or the congressman or state assembly or president of the United States. They would write, which they would always have a return answer, but they would never actually wouldn't okay what they wanted to do. Anyway, the first thing I remember about Lawndale when I was living there was when the World War II ended. I was about five and a half. I was born in 41, 45, August of 45. I was four and a half years old, and I remember my dad going out firing a shotgun to celebrate the end of World War II. So that's about the first thing I remember in Lawndale. My dad worked during the Depression. He worked up in Inglewood chair factory up in Inglewood, and he got laid off during the Depression. And then he borrowed some money from his father-in-law and built a house next to the one he built. He got his unemployment insurance a little bit, and the money he got from my grandfather, he built a rental house. I remember going up Hawthorne Boulevard. Used to have a railroad go up the middle of it. They took it out around 1937 and removed the tracks. But there's a bunch of eucalyptus trees growing along there, and it's used as a bridle trail where people could ride their horse clear to Palos Verdes on the bridle trail. And then we used to go up where the railroad tracks went through the South Bay Shopping Center. We used to go up there and get gravel to mix concrete. And my dad would haul buckets of gravel on his running boards or his whole reel back to Lawndale. We used to have a lot of fun playing along the railroad tracks. That was kind of our recreation. Of course, we were always taught to be careful around the trains so you wouldn't get hurt or killed. But it's an interesting story about the railroad tracks. When they built the part south of Manhattan Beach Boulevard, at the same time they were subdividing the property, they didn't want to tell the new owners that the railroad was coming through, so what they did, they made the railroad easement. They took some lots and set it aside for the railroad, and if someone wanted to buy one of those lots, they would say, well, that lot's already sold. In those days, they didn't have any truth of, like real estate people today, you're supposed to tell the truth about things you know about the property. Anyway, it was kind of a wide easement for the railroad. And back in those days, they had steam engines, and they would huff and puff to go up. We had a heavy load and we had to go up the hill up to Artesia. They would really huff and puff at night to get up to Artesia. So that was what kind of where we spent a lot of our recreation time. And out there by TRW was a big field. We used to go out there and hunt. They used to grow lima beans out there. And
A glass of water?
yeah,
Pause.
but
I'll do a pause.
and also on the train tracks up by about 162nd Street was a little cut the railroad made. It was banks of dirt on each side of the railroad track. It's hardly noticeable today. I think it's been graded. But we used to go up there, and then remember my friend that lived on 159th Street, Chuck Daggett. Him and I went up there. We were only about 6 years old, and these older kids come down there dressed up like Indians, had their shirts off and had the feathers on their head. And we didn't know if they were Indians or what. Anyway, that's about as far as we went on the tracks that way. Then I went to kindergarten at South School, 163rd in Gravilla, and they had a big playground on the west side of the school. My older brother told me that they did some digging there when he went there, and they found some bones of a horse. I think that's where the old ranch house was. The museum came out to investigate the bones, but they never did. We never did hear the results of what they found out. But Lawndale, Hawthorne Boulevard was the main street going through Lawndale, and a lot of little businesses along there when we were kids. There was Reinhardt's department store up on 164th Street, lumber yard, and up on down Beach Boulevard there was Hal Royer's Red Barn, a famous bar, and they used to have a parking lot. It's right where the Security Bank, or now it's a Blockbuster Videos, and they had a parking lot on the north, and it was just topsoil and broken beer bottles for the parking lot back in those days. But then when the Laundry Park, when they built the pool, we were the first ones to start using the pool. And before that, we'd go down there, and my older brother would swim in the lake. But then they built the pool, and then when they first opened, we went down there, and then every week they'd come out with new rules, what you couldn't do, because they could see what we were doing, and they would make a rule that next week you couldn't do it. We'd have first we brought inner tubes down there, and they'd float around in the inner tubes, and then next week, no inner tubes allowed. And then we did bring other stuff, and then next week, no, that's not allowed. And then they had a tower in the middle of the swimming pool, so a lifeguard, when they were busy, a lifeguard could be on the tower in the middle of the pool in case someone needed help. I mean, it's kind of a large pool. It's still there today. I mean, the pool's there, the tower's not there. Trouble is, when the pool wasn't busy, there was no lifeguard in the tower, and then we would use it for a diving platform when the pool was only about 3 or 4 foot deep, really wasn't deep enough to be diving off of a tower. So then he took the tower out. But finally, after got all the regulations straightened out, it was a lot of fun to go there each day in the summer and go for a swim. And the Laundry Park, they used to have on Prairie and Manhattan Beach Boulevard, where the baseball fields are now. There used to be a naval housing area, and then when I was a kid, we used to deliver newspapers in that area. That's why I kind of know that area. But Pirate Days, back in the 50s, that was always a lot of fun. We looked forward all summer long. They put out their banners. They're going to have Pirate Days. They have all these booths where you can win a goldfish or win rabbit, win the stuffed animal. Later on, a lot of vacant lots in Lawndale. There'd be a house. Well, people like my father, they'd buy, instead of buying one lot, they would buy 2 or 3 or 4 lots, and that way they could sell them off in the future, make money, or they could let some of their relatives build a house on a lot. So the lots were cheap, so they usually bought more than one lot. My dad built a market on Manhattan Beach Boulevard in Manziel. First it was called Roberts Market. He built that back in the 40s. And first they rented out to a man named Roberts, and he had Roberts Market, and he had a real nice butcher department. And later on, when his kids were raised, my mom, she ran the market. My dad worked at U.S. Steel in Torrance. My mom would work in the market during the day, and then my dad would work in the evenings. They called it Andy's Handy Market. And all the neighborhood would buy their groceries there. We had a credit where you'd come in and you'd buy stuff on credit, and then they would pay you. Payday, they'd come and pay you. Then Andy's Handy Market. I was kind of more familiar with Manhattan Beach Boulevard and Hawthorne. They had on the northeast corner, they had Frank's Market. It was a large market in those days, and it was. I remember back in the 50s, a big gas truck ran off the road and went right through the double doors, clear to the back wall of the market, injuring one of the workers in the produce real bad. I think he was the only one that was injured. And then they had on the southeast corner, they had Barron's gas station, mobile gas station, which he ran for years. I think he went to Lusinger, and then earlier in the 40s, and then he operated the gas station, I think, after his father retired. Then on the southwest corner, there was Lawndale Concrete, owned by Bill Melville. He bought that property from my dad. My dad was a part-time real estate man. He was a real estate broker. I think he sent off through the mail, and they gave him his broker's license. And he was selling real estate part-time, and that was one of the lots he sold to Bill Melville. And he made his own concrete blocks. He had a building in the back, he made his own concrete blocks. But then he built a hardware store and a building supply in the front. But then they started making concrete blocks with an automation type, and so he didn't make any more concrete blocks, but he still sold building materials. On the northwest corner was Cliff's gas station. It was a Signal gas station at first, and it was just a small gas station. And I remember they used to have he had a dime on a counter with a wire soldered to it down to a coil, and then if some kid would go in there and try to take the dime, he would zap him with a coil and shock him with a trick he used to play on the kids. Then after Cliff's gas station was there in the 50s, and Clancy's All-American Hamburgers, they built a stand there. And I worked there as a teenager, and he used to have his kitchen down on Manhattan Beach Boulevard by Manziel. It was HLW Corporation, and he supplied all the Clancy's restaurants. They had one by El Camino College on the south side, and they had one in Manhattan Beach and Redondo Beach. And they used to supply all those hamburgers, called Clancy's All-American Hamburgers. So I worked there. And then they built the Optimus Club, Friend of the Boy, and they had a fundraiser. And my brother Andrew and Russell Burns, they said whoever sold the most raffle tickets would get a free trip to Catalina. So they sold the most raffle tickets, but they never got the trip to Catalina. So they were kind of disappointed. That was must have back in the 40s, in the late 40s when they built that building. That building's still there today. It's there between Manhattan Beach Boulevard and 156 on the east side of the street. Now it's some kind of an auto dealership. It's been remodeled and it's now being used for an automobile repair. Another fun place in Lawndale was the skating rink on 156th Street, Hawthorne Boulevard on the northwest corner. It was supposed to be advertised the world's largest outdoor skating rink. And when I was a kid there, I would go there and you could either get shoe skates or clamp-on skates. Clamp-on skates were cheaper than the shoe skates, so we always get the clamp-on skates. And trouble is, it kept coming off, and they'd have these older boys that would work there, and they would come and with a little tool put the clamps back on your, put the skates back on your shoes. But it was kind of I remember it as being blacktop and painted with some kind of a paint, and it had cracks in it. So every time you didn't jump over a crack, you'd knock your skate off. But they actually had some state champion skaters come out of that skating rink in Lawndale. They used to have, well, you'd go there and they'd have different things. They'd have like couples only and boys only, girls only, and different things so you wouldn't get too bored skating around in a circle. And then they would have races, competition, and some pretty good skaters came out of that skating rink. Then they had Noah's Ark there on Hawthorne Boulevard, and that was famous. That was on the east side of the street, just north of Manhattan Beach Boulevard. It was a big building, no floor, dirt floor. You kind of walked down in a hole. They had all kind of really neat antiques, and a lot of people came from far away to buy their antiques at that Noah's Ark. That was a famous business in Lawndale. Within the freeway, they talked about the freeway for a long time. It was actually built about 1962, the 405 freeway. At first, no one knew where the route was going to be, approximately. So my dad started writing letters where he thought the route should be. And as it turned out, I think they used the top of my dad's two-story building for a survey monument. And the center of the freeway went right over our property, took all 4 lots. But that really, I'd say from 45 on, they knew the freeway was coming, and they didn't know exactly where, when, but you couldn't really plan on doing anything on your property. You couldn't really, didn't feel like improving it, didn't feel like adding on. And I remember the Moreau Plumbing, they had a business on Manhattan Beach Boulevard, and they went and one of their lots, they went and poured a dummy slab like they were going to build a building. They had no intention of building it, but when the state came on to buy it, they showed them where they were going to build a building and try to get more money from the state. So finally, the state came through and bought all the vacant lots. We had one vacant lot, and they bought that. And then they came through, well, about a year later and bought all the commercial property when they bought my mom and dad's store. And then a couple of years later, about 1958, they came and bought all the residential property. And then that's when I moved. We had to move to Torrance. But then in 1961, we bought some property in Condon, 15710 Condon Avenue. We bought some, my brother and I bought some property for a welding shop. And then we bought some other property, 157. First we bought 15728 Condon, then we bought 15710. And then we sold that. Finally, we had a business there for 37 years, welding shop. First it was Meyer Brothers Iron Works. Then it was Major Erectors, and we finally sold that in 2001, and then I retired and moved down to Oceanside, where I still come up to Lawndale. Have a lot of memories of when I was a kid, with a lot of open spaces in Lawndale, and all the animals, the chickens and goats and burros. Everybody had animals in their backyard, and a lot of feed stores. Back in Hawthorne and Manhattan Beach Boulevard, there was 3 feed stores. The Sleeth feed store up by 160th Street, and there was that Florence feed store, which is also owned by the Sleeths, their son and daughter-in-law. Had a feed store 156 and Hawthorne Boulevard, or near the corner there. Had a feed store, and then there was another feed store on Manhattan Beach Boulevard, just about half a block west of Hawthorne, and I can't remember the name of that feed store, but it was, everybody had animals. Everybody bought scratch for their chickens or rabbit food for their rabbits, and so people used to supplement their income by raising chickens and rabbits and other animal, goats. And my grandfather used to raise goats in Germany, so when my oldest brother was born, he gave my dad a goat, and my dad raised goats for quite a few years, up to the 50s. And they used to graze across the street, Manhattan Beach Boulevard. On the north side was all a big farm, and they used, and then after they abandoned the farm, they used to graze this goat over there. Well, I guess that would be all for now. I'd like to talk forever about the history of Lawndale. I lived there for a long time, from 41 to 58. And then I had my business in there from 63 to 2001. Okay, thank you for the interview.